What we're going to do is we're going to get reports back from the four different streams that we had, and I'd like to invite our four speakers, Rachel Herrera, Mazarul Alam Babu, Jianfu Li, and Xavier Masutaro, to come and take their seats here. I'll give them 5 to 7 minutes each in running order to report back on the highlights of the discussions. And as you remember, the four themes were human social systems, natural ecosystems, industry and the built environment, and island communities. And the questions that each of the themes were asked to address were, what do we need to be doing? What are the gaps in our knowledge and experience? And what do we need to do next in terms of filling those gaps? So let me start by inviting Rachel Herrera to give us a feedback on the human and social systems theme. Rachel, you want to come on up?
Thank you, Professor, and good afternoon to everyone. Before, I would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to everyone, resource persons, participants, and our co-hosts for making our sessions informative and engaging over the last 2 days. So for our thematic stream, Resilience in Human and Social Systems, we identified 7 key messages. One from our plenary session, Local Governments at the Forefront, and one for each of our 6 parallel sessions. And our thematic stream obviously focused on peoples and the human person, recognizing that climate change impacts vary greatly from one community to another and in varying degrees of magnitude. So we've looked into innovations in adaptation policies, planning, science and finance, and how all of these enhance our people's capacity to adapt, especially for highly marginalized and vulnerable groups, such as those in the Philippines example in the agriculture sector, farmers and fishers, and those that are already struggling to address poverty, conflict, and inequality. Our first key message is that there is a need to enhance climate information services to find ways on how to upgrade and improve efforts for the benefit of the most vulnerable sectors. Climate information must guide policy and practice, especially in implementing context-based adaptation efforts, such as forecast-based financing and multifunctional farming systems for communities. Science can work well with local government units and communities if information is processed quickly and transferred well. This leads to our second key message on gender. As impacts of climate change exacerbate existing inequalities, especially among women and children, it is extremely important that the gender perspective be further integrated into all aspects of action. Gender inequality becomes more pronounced in times of disasters and extreme weather events, especially when forced migration occurs. And developing early warning systems to avoid displacements helps ensure that migration is a choice rather than a necessity. The development and investment on technologies that can arm women to build resilience and within the context of social cohesion, good governance, these are very important, and that women and men equally build the resilience of their communities. Our third point is that social protection programs have the capacity to help the vulnerable and the poor to cope with impacts, but these programs should acknowledge the unique sensitivities of communities. Resilience is better supported when social protection comprehensively covers various aspects such as employment, livelihood, development of skills. And this brings me to our fourth point, the identification and development of skills for a green economy and strengthening the education system for green jobs and just transition must be accessed by the most vulnerable sector, including the informal economy. Investment in infrastructure that promotes a just transition to a low carbon economy, such as shifting to sustainable energy, adopting a circular economy, investing in water infrastructure and afforestation will create new green jobs and better wages. There are already relevant technologies that we have at the local level, but the challenge again is how to scale them up so that we also provide incentives and we support research and development. The ADB has identified three types in facilitating a just transition. First, building awareness. Second, developing sector and occupation to specific skills. And third, enhancing leadership to bring financing mechanisms and market mapping together. So this leads us to our fifth key message. Financing mechanisms, including risk transfer, must follow the three A's. They must be affordable, meaning pro-poor. They must be accessible, and they meaning they are available at various touch points, and they are appropriate or consistent with the needs and requirements of the sectors that will use them, and through effective distribution channels. The importance of convergence is heavily emphasized in our sessions on integrating climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction together in the national development processes. And this is our sixth key message. Multi-sector stakeholders' participation in the development planning processes is beneficial to mainstream CCA and DRR in the planning at the national and local levels. We have aptly named our plenary session Local Governments at the Forefront because adaptation should really be embraced at the local level. And so, for our last key message, achieving climate resilience is context based and community specific, and local governments must understand the science of it and also empower their people themselves to address their risks and vulnerabilities. Adaptation, based on the insights of our chief executives, is really just simply being innovative and actually finding the solutions to address the risks. Science informed governance that puts the welfare of the people, especially of our women, our children, and our vulnerable groups, at the core of our climate action and our investment plans is the ideal approach to build genuine resilience and to make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for that excellent set of insights from your theme. I'm now going to invite Xavier Matsutaro from the Republic of Palau to talk to us about the ocean and island communities. Xavier?
Good afternoon, colleagues. So mine is a summary and a recap of what transpired in the past 3 days. And actually, dating back one day even earlier, we had a side event on decentralized energy infrastructure. And those of you that were here heard the talk by Matt Trenchin on that. But maybe I'll leave you, since most of you probably heard his speech. He articulates it way better than me. But if you want to partner up with their organization, you can visit them at islandresilience.com, where you will find similar opportunities that we benefited from as well. So for day one, I'm just going to give the big picture. In the morning, we discussed sort of the interrelationship between indigenous knowledge and science. I think to a certain point, with the years and years of experience dating back thousands of years, there is value in that. At the point at which where climate change comes in, where traditional knowledge might have its cap, is when you would then bring in those science to build further resilience into those traditional practices. And that, I believe, is one of the key messages for that day. The other key message is mobilization of resources and funding. And that occurs both domestically and internationally. I think the key message here is that it takes cooperation both domestically and internationally in order to combat this very big issue. And for the effectiveness of the actions on the ground, there needs to be more better communication, so that the support that's provided and that support that's received fits the needs of the community. Okay, so moving on to day number 2, it was about innovative approaches for actions. And one of the interesting talks, oceans is kind of this growing initiative and becoming, gaining a lot of traction um, globally. And one of the things that we touched upon was the different perspective on blue growth. And we got a perspective from Papua New Guinea on them making use of the mangroves, the seagrass. And we found out that they actually absorb more carbon dioxide than terrestrial forest. So that was interesting to hear about, and maybe something worth exploring in terms of I guess you could see it as mitigation, but enhancing and protecting these ecosystems, one would argue that it also enhances everybody's livelihoods and thereby increasing their resilience as well. Also on day 2, there was a recognition of the public-private partnership. We had examples here from the Philippines and as well as from Palau. And it's interesting that they're very similar, but had some unique differences. And for those that participated in that discussion, really got some really good insights in kind of how private is now being a little bit more proactive in the scene, and which is really what we try to draw in, because again, it really takes partners at all different levels in all different ways in order to combat this very big issue that we're facing. On day 3, which is today, focused on policies. And it was talking about having the policy setting the tone for action, but it also highlighted that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done from the policy level all the way down to the implementation level. And it requires buy-in from our stakeholders in order to do that. And that being said, also looking at ways to climate-proof your infrastructure with the idea of having a sustainable development integrated into the resiliency of our development plans. I think that covers it all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Xavier, for that excellent set of recommendations and descriptions of the discussions, which were very rich. I'm now going to invite Xianfu Lu from the Asian Development Bank to talk about the theme on industries and built environment.
Thank you very much, Salim. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'm probably one of the diligent students. I was given the instruction to summarize the messages from our stream using a particular matrix. So that's what I did. Apparently, I'm probably going to be the outlier. So it's very good. Yeah, it will be very foolish for me trying to really capture fully what we have discussed in very, very rich sessions, 6 technical sessions and 1 very rich plenary session as well on the topic of resilience of the key economic sectors and the built environment infrastructure. So if we have looked at the, can I have the next slide, please? I have this. Yeah, so we have the labelers in one dimension of the matrix. So we talked about policies, practices, finance, and the information and analysis as enablers for resilience. So on the policy side, we talked about the national level legislation trying to introduce legislations to manage different climate-related risks and hazards. And then we talked about the industry level movements, the TCFD recommendations. We've also talked about international financial institutions such as ADB introducing corporate level risk management frameworks and processes and so on. So we identify the challenges and importantly opportunities to address those challenges. So the policy side, we talked about introducing new policies, like implementing legislations are not without complication, and they have fundamental implications for the business processes. Not to see the least in our own home here, we try to get our operations colleagues on board to consider climate risks in the project development. It's not always straightforward, so there are challenges. And but we also talked about the dividend of long-term benefits of investing in resilience. So those things can be gradually addressed. And the practices in our technical sessions, I think we structured our sessions slightly differently, maybe from our partners. We structured our practices in enabler dimensions through a few technical sessions around the nature-based solutions and the smart climate resilient cities, and also the climate resilient design and standards. And so I think a lot of these messages captured here in terms of challenges and opportunities was mentioned in Rachel's summary, which is very reassuring. What we're approaching the resilience topic from different aspects, and there are converging messages here. So the nature-based solutions is not a silver bullet, and it cannot function on its own. It has to be used in conjunction with other types of solutions, green, gray, and blue infrastructure integrated to provide the resilience for cities and urban centers and the broader natural environment. And we emphasized that there were quite a lot of discussion around the bottom-up approach, also the engagement of stakeholders. We need to make sure everybody's on board. Things cannot be imposed on communities. And some of the discussions around the design standards also talk about the interesting complexity around, on one hand, the design standards has its legal barrier. Therefore, we cannot just change the standards without any legal process. But on the other hand, we could also leverage its power and the influence to mainstream some of the resilience considerations in the design process. And moving on to the finance element. So we talked about a growing and diverse range of sources for financing resilience adaptation, and it includes public-private financing from the public sector side, not just those traditional vertical climate-related finance under the UNFCCC, and we've also seen increasingly from the national budgets, increasingly allocating resources for resilience building. On the private sector side, not just the traditional philanthropy or the insurance sector, we also see capital markets at large to pay much more attention to adaptation projects, and with the social impact investing getting more traction. And then challenge side, we see a lot more challenge around the definition, the criteria, what really constitutes the adaptation project. And so the key message around there is really to further understanding what really is adaptation projects in relation to mitigation, and help the industry define criteria to help crowd in more resources. And then the information analysis side, we talked a lot about the availability, the accessibility, and the applicability of information, and they need to be relevant for decision makers. And we also, in terms of the current practices, we talked about digital technology for informing adaptation resilience decisions. We had lots of discussion around the big data and crowdsourcing for key information to manage flood risks, for example. So these were a lot of good points about the ways to address this. I just want to highlight a couple of cross-cutting themes emerged from the discussions. We emphasize a lot about the systems thinking. We can't deal with different elements in the system in isolation, particularly river basin and the green infrastructure. Talk about engagement and the consultation process, the importance of that, and also knowledge and the partnership. And this is why we are all here for 3 days, and the wish is a bit longer, and there's a lot to talk about, and we cannot resolve the problem on our own. We need a collective wisdom. And of course, there's always this monster of uncertainties, and we don't know very much about what's going to happen for the future for sure, but we have to make decisions now. So to end, I want to put this quotation up for you about how do we deal with uncertainties from my colleague in ADB. So we all need to deal with that. You can't use that as an excuse for not doing anything. The challenge is to really deal with them programmatically and transparently. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yanfu, for that excellent summary. It's the fastest proceedings of a conference that I've ever seen produced. Well done. Okay, next I'm going to invite Mazharul Alam Babu to talk to us about the nature-based systems.
Thank you, Salim. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. The ecosystem-based adaptation and building the resilience, all of you have discussed and spent more than 50 hours, and I have been given the 5 minutes. So I'll be only covering 1% of your discussion, and that was so rich. And if you see that I'm going to repeat what Jianfu has mentioned, believe me, we haven't copied each other. And I'm going to follow exactly as a very obedient student the way Jianfu has mentioned and presented, but in a slightly different style. I had a bit of a longer time than her to come up with these slides. So under the ecosystem resilience, the stream, we had the similar conversation under 5 enablers. So under the policy and the governance, the discussion revealed that there are the recognition, both at the national, the sectoral, as well as the spatial level planning. If we look into the integrated water resource management, integrated coastal zone management, we have many examples of such kind. And the focus is primarily, if we look into the ecosystem, either the water or the forest or the coastal area in terms of the area of the dominance. If we look into the challenges, and when we are talking about the adaptation, is primarily the local level action. The challenge is translating those into the local level and bringing it for the community and the people and obtaining the benefit. So one of the person mentioned that, you scientists, you understand the problem, tell us what we need to do on the ground. And you capture the science, you bring it to the scientific knowledge and understanding. In terms of the way forward is the coordination, the mechanisms are there, but one of the things highlighted is not only the issue of putting the governance structure, but we need the champion. And that makes the difference in terms of implementation. When we are looking into the planning and designing, it was primarily focusing on the new ecosystem that we call the urban, because it is the area of our economic growth and also providing the services to the people in a large number and supporting the economy. So when we looked into the understanding of this, the ecosystem-based adaptation into the urban context, the knowledge is very low if we compare that against the rural setting where the knowledge is happening and project also being implemented more. So if we look into the type, then it is more on the issue of the system that requires the different understanding. We cannot actually copy what we have learned in the rural setting and applying it in the urban setup. So we need to make it very context specific, but also we need to raise the awareness of the city government and the people and provide the practical examples to them, and where we talked about the hybrid. And this is where one of the key messages came. If we look into the cities, it is not only talking about the nature base, we need to blend it, we need to bring the nature base and the hard infrastructure together. So whole the issue of the blending came here. If we look into the practices and the technologies, again, we have heard from the people that things are happening, but not necessarily they are calling all of those practices as an ecosystem-based adaptation. And the focus of the intervention is also looking into the ecosystem, the provisioning services rather than regulating services, so where we are missing the other part of the ecosystem and their services. And primary reason behind the provisioning services connecting directly with the people's livelihood and their income. So we need to work on both the provisioning and other services so that we don't lose the sight on others. If we look into the financing and investings, there are options available, but not necessarily every options of the provision that we have in terms of sources using the same criteria in terms of supporting the adaptation, particularly focusing on it ecosystem-based. Here, the difficulties is justifying because of the requirements varied by the source of funding. And one of the speakers mentioned that if we look into the Green Climate Fund, it looks like that we are doing the PhD research to put the climate narratives to justify the investment. So the way forward, we need to work together, both in terms of the regulatory framework, bringing the cases, etc., and where we see that institutions will be able to provide more support to bring the evidence to justify that. Similarly, if we look into the science and the assessment, also the sciences assessment are primarily focusing on the pilot interventions where the interventions are happening. So the knowledge is high on that side, but we are not seeing the integration is happening because the different sectors are actually running by their own and integration is not happening. And this is what one of the things that we also need to bring together, the integrated approach and understanding the ecosystems and addressing that part. Let me end by putting the three main areas in terms of the recommendation. One is the complexities been recognized and the solutions are there and we found. But what we need to scale up for those complexities to avoid and scale up the intervention. One is evidence for making the cases, both at the policy, the planning, access to finance. Second is role of the science and the assessment, as I have already mentioned, presenting the strong narrative, bringing the multidisciplinary team and expert for the integration. And the partnership in the masses way that we have captured is probably the vehicles to accelerate actions and means to build and monitor resilience and address the temporal dimension that we all talked about. Let me end by repeating the quote that Yusuf Nasser from the UNFCCC mentioned, that extinction is forever and the ecosystem resilience takes a really, really long time. But let me add to that, and therefore it's possibly more wise to finance and invest in the ecosystem-based approaches to avoid extinction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Babu, for that excellent presentation of your theme. I'd like to all ask you to give our four presenters a hand for that excellent summarization. Before I hand over to the next session lead, I'm going to take a few minutes of reflections and sharing. I'm not going to summarize, but I will share some reflections, three reflections on the event that I've felt. a bit looking back and a bit looking forward. So looking back, this is now the sixth Asia Pacific Regional Adaptation Forum that's been held, and I've had the privilege of being to all six. In fact, I also went to the one in Bangkok that got flooded, and then I had to leave again and then come back to the event. And I've also had the privilege of going to other regional fora in Africa, Asia, Latin America, in other continents. And I must say that I said this in the beginning, that I think by far the Asia regional one has grown in terms of its engagement with stakeholders, its engagement with knowledge producers and practitioners and policymakers, and a rich way of sharing that in the format of the meetings themselves, I think have also evolved over time to make them much richer. And in particular, I would say the addition of the youth group this time has made a big difference. So I'd like to shout out to Antoinette and Dina, our youngest participant from Pakistan. Let's give them a hand. I think the inclusion of youth is something that we hope to be able to continue into the future. One other stakeholder group that I think we've always struggled with, we're doing better with, is the private sector. We've got more of them this time, but we do need to go beyond the insurance industry to reach out to other sectors of the private sector to get them involved in adaptation in future. And I think that's another thing we need to give some more thought to going forward. The second point I'll make is to pick up on something I mentioned at the beginning as well, which is that given the circumstances, particularly the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees, which gives us the urgency of action, and at the same time, what we are seeing all around us with the hurricanes and cyclones taking place and wildfires, etc., we are now seeing human-induced climate change happening in real time, and therefore loss and damage from human-induced climate change also happening. So loss and damage cannot be brushed under the rug anymore. It's something we're going to have to take into account. And one particular aspect of that, which I think is very relevant here, is what we call in the loss and damage jargon, non-economic loss and damage, which are things like forced displacement, people having to move because of climate change. And it's something that we are going to face a lot more of. We're going to have to think about it. And in adaptation parlance, we need to think of how do we make migration into a positive adaptation rather than into a negative forced displacement, which is what it is now. And that's something to think about in terms of a transformative adaptation strategy going forward. So I would, again, encourage people to start thinking about what we might do along those lines in future meetings. And then my third and final point is to pick up again on the knowledge aspects of it and also on the peculiarities of adaptation as a science. Adaptation science is a learning by doing science. It requires practice to generate knowledge that then can feed into generalized theoretical knowledge. And we are seeing a lot of practice happening on the ground, particularly in our region in the Asia Pacific. But I feel we're not capturing that experiential knowledge well enough. So I would like to propose, and this is now aimed at our friends from the ADB and UNEP and other agencies in the region, to see whether we can build up a bottom-up network of practitioners, a nexus between practitioners and learners, so that we are learning in real time from the practice that is being done on adaptation to climate change in the region, which is a lot, so that in 2 years' time, when we reconvene for the 7th conference, we will have a much better and more systematic basis rather than simply anecdotal, as we have at the moment, of what lessons we are learning from practice. Practice can be at the national level, in national planning, sectoral level, at the planning level, private sector practice, and most importantly, the vulnerable communities themselves are learning a lot. And that's another stakeholder group that we need to get better at bringing to these kinds of events and learning and getting them to participate. So with that pitch, I'll close my bit here and hand over to, I think Jian Lu is going to take over for the final session. So let's give our speakers one more hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we are nearly there. I'm very impressed that we still have a pretty much full house. So now, no good party is a good party can end without some proper goodbyes and thank yous. So now this final closing session is to give the opportunity of some of the important people behind this forum to say a few parting words before we all return to our homes and get on with our daily routine again. So may I now welcome on stage, first of all, Wu Chong my Director General from the Sustainable Development Climate Change Department of ADB. Yes. And Commissioner Rachel Herrera, she's currently the national focal point for the Philippine Climate Change Commission. And we also have Ms. Guarico, the Trade Commissioner from the Embassy of Canada to the Philippines. Isabel Luis, Deputy Regional Director, UN Environment Asia Pacific Office. Rachel, Isabel. Caleb Udoy, Senior Economic Advisor and Chairman, Oceans 2020 Executive Committee and Office of the President, Republic of Palau. Last but not least, Professor Masataka Watanabe, the Chairman of the Global Adaptation Network, is the parent network of the APAN. Professor Watanabe. So if I may now, which one would you like to come here, say a few words? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is really impressive. Very, very last session, we do have a full house. This must have been a really, really interesting session for everyone. Thank you, Shampoo, and thank you, Preeti, for making this happen also. Ms. Guarico, Ms. Herrera, Ms. Louise, Mr. Udui, Professor Watanabe, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here today, finally, after 3 days of doing other things around the fringes of the conference, to be able to say something as part of this closing plenary. The 6th APAN Forum is actually very, very important in many different ways. First, it's because it's the first one after our long-term strategy is approved. I'm sure you've heard about our long-term strategy 2030. And if you compare the 2020 strategy and this one, the overarching objective is the same. It's the poverty reduction. But there's one key difference between 2020 and 2030, and that's resilience. So we have the prosperity, inclusiveness, resilience, and sustainability as the 4 legs which will take us to the prosperity, to the poverty reduction in the Asian Pacific region. So this is in the heart of the core of the this conference, and that's core of our long-term strategy. And also, as it was mentioned several times, and this is happening just right after the IPCC report, which highlights, among other things, many adverse impacts associated with 1.5 degree warming, while our planet is on course to nearly 3 degree warming, even if all mitigation commitments are achieved across the board. So the need for building resilience in our human, natural, and economic systems to unavoidable climate change impacts is made ever more important. Second, this forum is the first time that it's being co-hosted by 3 partners. That is, ADB is honored to work with the Philippine government, our host of this organization, the government of Palau, in close collaboration with the UN Environment, which work very close together to plan and deliver this excellent program. I would like to thank the partners for all this fruitful collaboration which consolidates the foundation for joint efforts to build resilience in our countries and economies and in communities for years to come. I would like to thank the government of Canada for their generous contribution through ADB to organize this forum as well. I would like to thank, of course, all of you who participated actively. And I think somebody mentioned 50 hours. That's quite impressive. Without your contribution, I think it would not have been possible. And of course, last but not the least, all the colleagues working behind the scenes, as well as in the front lines, in our operations, in our knowledge group, which made this event highly successful. So some of the key takeaways from these 50 hours of discussion, and I will not go through all the details, through 10 deep dive workshops, 6 plenary sessions, nearly 30 technical sessions, you have collectively shared and generated monumental amount of knowledge and insights on how myriad of resilient solutions and practices are available. In addition, many new partnerships and alliances were forged to take these solutions and practices to scale. The Asian Development Bank shall carefully review and analyze all the ideas that came out of this forum and see how we can really deliver prosperity, inclusiveness, resilience, and sustainability in our region, the Asia and the Pacific region. As our Vice President Susan Tono mentioned in this opening remarks on Wednesday, we have made very good progress in delivering climate resilience in our region, but we still have lots to do and many miles to go in this arena. Given the growing significance of the Asian and Pacific region, the global battle against climate change will be won. I won't say lost, because we will win this one in our region. Acutely aware of our responsibility as the region's major development partner, we believe that action matters. And as you heard about our strategy 2030, we have a very strong and ambitious target set up, which is essential in putting ideas into action and delivery at the end of the day. And taking pride in our Finance Plus Plus principles, ADB attached great significance to knowledge and partnership for their pivotal role in guiding and supporting our financing operations. And in our long-term strategy, finance is very closely related to our knowledge and partnership, because there's the magnitude of work to be done cannot be absorbed just with ADB ourselves. So this complex issue of climate change, we all have to collaborate together, and this is a very good start of this collaboration, which started six years ago, I guess. But we hope that we will continue this effort and collaboration over the next 12 years through Strategy 2030. So with these words of gratitude, aspiration, and commitment on behalf of ADB, I would like to wish all of you a safe journey over the weekend. Hopefully you don't have to work too much, and be ready to start our work again on Monday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DG. And now Commissioner Rachel Herrera.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. Director General Om, Ms. Louise, Ms. Guarico, and Mr. Caleb Udui, and Professor Watanabe. Good afternoon. And on behalf of the Climate Change Commission and our Vice Chairperson, Emmanuel de Guzman, who could not join us here today, and our co-organizers, the ADB and the Republic of Palau, we thank you very much for your rich contributions to these 3 days of engagement and conversation. And we obviously, this is a full house, and there must be a lot of interest generated, and we hope that you go back to your own countries, your own communities and institutions, enlightened and energized to discuss more about climate change adaptation. Over the last 3 days, we talked about the role of local governments in enabling successful action, and how integration across political boundaries provide powerful pathways towards adaptation. We talked about social protection programs and how these can become powerful investment instruments to strengthen resilience. We talked about creeping yet pervasive impacts of slow onset climate events, and how to be conscious of gender responsive adaptation approaches, about supporting vulnerable communities through risk transfer and risk financing, and how green approaches can in fact spur economic development and widen the horizon of opportunity for the poor and the marginalized. We shared knowledge with each other. We went down to the brass tacks when we could. We deepened the consensus whenever possible, and we reaffirmed the indisputability of science. More importantly, we talked about our own experiences and how, from our own, from where we all came from how our people found ways to pull together to move forward after every disaster. And we talked about real lives, real stories. And this is precisely why we are here, because at the end of our discussions, going home, we would not want to just be holding our position papers, our documents, because at the bottom line are human lives that are at risk because of climate change and its impacts. And so I'd like to look back and remind everyone of the 1.5 special report that we also discussed lengthily over the last 3 days, and the urgency that this climate goal has helped shape our discussions here. The past 3 days, we have contextualized adaptation to the broader perspective of climate action. And I hope that is what we take back with us, new perspectives to escalate adaptation in our respective countries and to heed the call of 1.5. Thank you very much, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your stay in Manila.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Now, may I invite Ms. Guarico from the Embassy of Canada.
DGO, Commissioner Rachel, Ms. Louise, Mr. Udui, and Professor Watanabe, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Government of Canada, I would like to thank you for your active participation in the 6th Asia-Pacific Climate Adaptation Forum. This approach of strengthening resilience to climate change in the context of inclusive and sustainable development is extremely important to the Asia and the Pacific. While the region has made significant progress in reducing poverty, there remains a large share of population for whom the threat of poverty is not over. These poor and vulnerable neighbors are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and some of the impacts will profoundly change their lives, our lives. Canada is committed to helping the most vulnerable communities adapt to climate change, mitigate its impacts, and by leveraging private sector investment, facilitate the transition to a low-carbon economy. As well, Canada's feminist international assistance policy emphasizes the role of women and girls because they are particularly at risk when it comes to threats such as rising sea levels, floods, heat waves, droughts, desertification, and water shortages. Recognizing that women and girls are uniquely affected by the damaging effects of climate change, Canada supports women's leadership and decision-making in climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts, resilience building, and sustainable natural resource management. Canada is not immune from adverse effects of climate change, by the way. Canadians are deeply concerned with how to deal with a host of climate change-related disasters affecting the country, including forest fires, drought, flooding, melting sea ice, and the changing ecosystem in the north, ocean plastics, and fisheries depletion. Canada is working across all its platforms, domestically, internationally, to address these issues head-on. It has put in place strong measures domestically to meet its Paris Agreement commitments and made climate change a central pillar of its G7 presidency this year, including championing the Plastics Charter. Canada is also supporting employment and business opportunities for women in the renewable energy sector. We are doing this by ensuring that climate financing is equally accessible to women-led initiatives and enterprises. Complementing these efforts is Canada's $2.65 billion investment in climate finance to help the most vulnerable countries adapt to and mitigate climate change. And we are working closely with ADB on this one. This also enables them to make transition to a low carbon and move towards climate resilient economies. Canada is therefore glad to support this forum as it provided an opportunity to discuss concrete examples of actions being taken by governments, development partners, and civil society organizations, including grassroots organizations, to strengthen resilience. We are pleased to be able to partner with the ADB in supporting the organization of this conference under the Integrated Disaster Risk Management Fund. In closing, on behalf of the Government of Canada, I would like to thank the Government of the Philippines, Government of Palau, United Nations Environment, and the Asian Development Bank for successfully organizing this conference, and to all of you for your active participation. Canada looks forward to working with all of you in addressing the key climate change challenges faced by the countries and people in this region. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now may I invite Caleb come up on behalf of Government of Palau.
Thank you, Jianfu. I notice our panel is not using the time clock. I should have brought my 20 PowerPoint slides, but I'll just stick to the notes I brought with me today. Fellow panelists, excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As we sail towards the end of our conference, we approach our destination. It's time now to get ready to take what we brought and put it into action. On behalf of the President and the Republic of Palau, I would like to thank all of you for making the 6th Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum a great success. A wealth of knowledge has been shared and invaluable relationships have been formed. I would also like to take this opportunity to extend our sincerest appreciation to the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines, the Asian Development Bank, for co-hosting the forum with the Republic of Palau. I'd also like to thank the UN EP Secretariat and the partners and the rest of the ad hoc advisory group. It was a pleasure working with you all. The Asia Pacific is a large and dynamic region, varying from expansive land masses to small atoll islands. And yet we were all impacted by the non-discriminatory nature of climate change. Globally, the Asia Pacific region has been one of the areas that has been hit the hardest from the impacts of climate change. However, we are not without options. And as we have seen today and for the past 2 days, there is great work being done around the region that can increase resilience, helping us to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And our experience is relevant to others around the world. The protection of nature and its natural ability to absorb and buffer the impacts faced by climate change is one of the key approaches to enhancing our resiliency. The ocean in particular has an important role to play. Palau stands proud to be her champion and calls on friends and partners to join hands to help restore her health. The ocean connects us all. As we go forward, I encourage you all to use this opportunity to share experience and forge further partnerships. We must be willing to share our successes and learn from our mistakes. We must build and strengthen our friendships. If we are to succeed in building resilience within our countries and our region, we must learn from each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Now may I invite Isabel from UNEP.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, DJ Commissioner Herrera, Commissioner Gorico, Caleb, and Professor Watanabe. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here on behalf of UN Environment, who has been Secretariat to the Adaptation Network, and see its growth and evolution into the 6th forum. I think it's been an amazing journey for those who have been involved in the planning and designing and to stand here and see 3 days of eventful discussions, exciting debates, and also the key messages that came out truly tell us that you've given us some real direction going forward. I would also like to thank the Ministry of the Environment of Japan for the gracious support to the forum all these years, and also, of course, to the Canadian government. For UN Environment, we are totally committed. Climate adaptation is an integral part of our work program, for which we support the member states. And we will take the messages from this forum into the preparations for the upcoming COP, and also into the United Nations Environment Assembly preparations in early 2019. But I would like to thank, on behalf of the UN Environment Secretariat for APAN, the many partners who contributed their time and effort to craft the last 3 days of program and contribute to the various sessions. ARUP, Stockholm Environment Institute, IGES, and the Asian Institute of Technology, among many others. As previous panelists have mentioned, really like to thank the 3 co-hosts of this year. It's been a very unique partnership, challenging each other to result in this amazing platform that we had this last few days. The Climate Change Commission, the Republic of Philippines, the Government of Palau, and the Asian Development Bank. Not only for what was delivered here together, the end result which you just saw in the messages, but more importantly for the help and support throughout the long year preparation to this forum. Thanks not only for what was delivered together, but the spirit of the partnership and the unwavering support and presence during the various meetings that were held online and face-to-face throughout the year. Personally, I think it's a successful journey reaching to this point, and we look forward to working with you as we go forward. We'd also like to thank all of you who graced the plenaries for imparting your words of wisdom and advice. Our moderators, speakers, discussants, 172 colleagues and partners who brought their experience and perspectives from over 60 countries, from all our different ecosystems, cities, and places around Asia and the region. The forum would not have run as smoothly as it did without the help of the events and conference facility teams of the ADB. Thank you very, very much. Your provision of great support, from the use of the apps, the registration of more than 1,000 guests, the logistics support, has provided a level of excellence that we can henceforth aspire to the next forum. And the food was also excellent, DJ. I'm happy with the participation of the private and business sector. I think we can do more, but we've already started on the journey. And also especially thankful to many of our Japanese colleagues who endeavored to share the latest technologies and processes, and also marketing and taking place in the marketplace, which was very well visited by many of you. And of course, as we all know, the notable achievement is the involvement of the youth, the young entrepreneurs, the influencers, the climate advocates. We heard from the survivors, we heard from those on the front line, and we heard from solution providers. More than this was very inspirational, and I laud the interdisciplinary multi-actor engagement of all the delegates. Over here, we have policymakers, planners, financiers, technologists, scientists discussing and exchanging amongst each other. So we feel very privileged to have harvested the wealth of your contributions and knowledge shared. And we received all your expressions of interest to continue to journey with us into the next forum in 2020. Till then, we wish you all the best, and thank you for your continued support and cooperation to the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Last but not least, Professor Watanabe, please.
Thank you, Sangfil. Dear panelists, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. During the past 3 days, we have discussed how to enhance the resilience of the social and human system, the natural ecosystem and ecosystem services, industry and the built environment, and island communities. From the viewpoint of the policy and governance, planning and processes, financing and investing, technologies and practices, science and assessment. huge knowledge has been accumulated on resilience and its enabling conditions through discussions in the panel discussion. I think it's necessary to make clear documentation of each summaries and also short statements for each streams and upload them in the website because it's easily forget. That's the nature of human being. Enabling condition for resilience is different for each system, different for each countries, different for each regions, and different each local communities. Therefore, I feel that we are just standing at the starting point of the long journey to understand what's the relationship between resilience and enabling condition, which will take, I think, historical time length, because we never have experienced in the past the climate change in our historical or civilization history. Therefore, the APAN will promote, I think this is the role of APAN, I feel. APAN will promote this collaboration and sharing experiences extensively with government, private sector, university, research institution, NGO, civil society organization, international organization, and most importantly, youth group, and also adaptation science group, such as Adaptation Future or AP Prat, and many other similar activities or groups in order to accelerate, this is the important point, accelerate the accumulation and analysis of knowledge on resistance and its enhancing condition. Because after listening 3 days of sessions, the forums presented the sort of framework of how to think about the resilience. But it's not describing any how to make it the resilience definition by more quantitatively, and also how to apply those into a local community, for example. But we are just hearing some of the example and lesson and experience from a limited number of the participants. But I think the role of APAN is to sort of summarize all those existing knowledge and experiences and feedback to the real community in practical action in the level. Therefore, it takes huge time and huge labor cost to sort of synthesize those knowledge into more simplified and useful tools. I think that's the next target, and which is a huge target for APAN to do. And I feel that we are just standing at the beginning of long journeys. I hope that we will continue this energy. And also I recall the 10 years ago, 2009, when we gathered UNEP regional office in Bangkok and discussed about the possibility of organizing Asia-Pacific Adaptation Network. At that time, we received many comments and also opinion from the surrounding people. And one of the word which I never forget is that don't worry about adaptation. The target of reducing CO2 by a certain year will be achieved without any problem. So we don't need any adaptation. But nevertheless, we started the first adaptation forum in 2010 in Bangkok. But then that time, I also remember that almost 500 people gathered. And we thought that, honestly speaking, it might be fake. This is not true. Then we try second one, and 600 people come, and maybe. But then we went to the Incheon in Korea, and similar number of people gather, and so on. And now I will introduce the sixth the APAN Forum, the statistics, I would like to introduce that in more accurately, which is provided by Martha. Thank you very much. The 1,358 registrations and about 1,000 participants in total who are coming from 60 countries. Detailed statistics also follow that 236 from the government, 118 from the business and private sector, which is an unbelievable number comparing with the first APAN Forum in Bangkok. We never dream of this kind of number of participation from the business and private sectors. 159 from academia, which is almost the same. 134 from NGO, 133 from civil society organization, 71 from an international partner, 84 from an international organization, 8 from youth group, which is the first experience for us to accept such the hopeful group of participation. And we, another unique point is that 13 business companies and institutions opened their exhibition booths and demonstrated their products and knowledge, which is useful for adaptation. And this is again the first experience for us to accept such a kind of a marvelous opportunity to have the booth. This is the first case ever in the history of APAN Forum, and I hope that those will increase in numbers and also size. Finally, I deeply appreciate the Asian Development Bank, Climate Change Commission, the government of the Philippines, and Office of Climate Change, Republic of Palau, for co-hosting Asia Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum 2018. Also, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to the Ministry of the Environment, Japan, and Canada for the main forum sponsoring. The APAN Forum 2018 is extremely successful, and I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all participation. This is because of your participation, and without your participation, we couldn't make such a great success. So I really appreciate for all your participation and also contribution, who made this forum activity very active and meaningful events. Also, my special thanks go to more than, I heard 60 ADB staffs and colleagues have been working hard, not on the surface, but in the back, and worked very hard before, during, and maybe we'll work after the forum, probably for cleaning and everything, and for preparation of the forum, arrangement of venue, and mostly warm hospitality. And I really hope would like to extend my sincere appreciation to those ADB staff. Thank you very much. And before I close the forum, I have to say one word, that next APAN Forum is not decided yet at this moment, but there are some possible candidates I heard, and we hope that we will hear it when it is confirmed. And with these words, I would like to finish my words, and thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Watanabe. And with those words of urgency, direction, encouragement, and challenge, even from our enablers of the forum, thank you all very much. And as the chair of the advisory committee for the forum, I wish you all well. Thank you very much. See you in 2020 at the 7th forum in the unknown location. Thank you very much. Now, don't go yet. We have most exciting part of the forum. We have a prize draw or raffle. So I will now invite Beck and Sylvia come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shanfu. So don't go yet. We have prizes. We have 10 lucky delegates who will be going home with a set of souvenirs from Palau and from the Philippines. And we have a grand prize. We have 9 consolation prizes and 1 grand prize. So maybe Xavier can discuss the grand prize.
Okay. Should I give it away? All right, so I'll tell you what the grand prize is. It's a wooden carving. We call it in Palau itabori. And this is it. The person that will win, I don't want to give away the story, but I feel like it'll make it extra special if the person that wins it knows what this story means. So for the rest of you guys, sorry, it'll be a mystery.
Okay, so we'll be randomly selecting names, those who have answered the forum feedback form in the app. So if you're here, please raise your hand and go to the tech booth to claim your prize. And for the grand prize winner, please stay in front for the ceremonial turnover of the very meaningful gift from Palau. Okay, so let's start. Adil Miss Jihan, Western Mindanao State University. Are you here? No. Next. Oredina, Miss Araceli Oredina of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. No. Next, please. Miss Christine Iza Lau. Oh, not here. Okay, next. Mr. Somphone Kampan. Not here. Mr. Charlie Balanon, Bacnotan, La Union, Philippines. Next, please. Jennifer Pia. Not here. Catherine Versosa. Yay! Finally! Next. Mr. Tan Nguyen Hai. Here, okay. Third one. Third one, please. Miss Jade Agapinan. Okay, next. Miss Faruhat Jamil. Not here, next. Mr. Romeo Ganal, DOST Pag-asa, here. Okay, third one. Thank you for staying on. Miss Sharon Patrice. Okay, next. Miss Benji Sarmiento. Not here.
Miss Kezia Camille Terrado. Oh, we got one. Institute for Climate Change. Whoever from this organization. Oh, we got one. Yep.
Attorney Pete Baniego from ISSC. Mr. Wilfredo Danumpines. Not here. Next. Remwin Lawrence Guevara.
Mr. Remwin, Lopez. I missed that one. Mr. Dennis Robles. Sorry. Mr. Mamerto Jr. Certifico. Not here. Mr. Kenneth Tua. Well, that sounds like a Polynesian name. No? All right. Mr. Rogelio Macat. Hey, we got one. Ministry of Environment. Anybody from the Ministry of Environment? I see kind of hands rising-ish, but... Oh, oh okay. The first one to get to...
Okay, so we'll give it to Dilruba of Ministry of Environment of Bangladesh. Miss Elram Peña. Okay. Not here. Next. Miss Lina Thomas.
It's okay, she's one of us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Miss Lina Thomas. Next, please. Mr. Julius Meneses. Oh, this is already the grand prize.
Oh, say what?
Okay, next. Miss Nori Gazel Mag Sombol.
I'm not sure how to do it. Do you go to the...
Yes, please.
Let's see, look at Yeah, I know the story. I'm going to email it to her later. Oh, congratulations. Thank you. In the island, we give hugs.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Here you go. There you go. Oh. Oh, to the middle.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. You're most welcome.
Now it's really officially over, and thank you very much. Safe journey home. Happy weekend. See you 2020.